Should you become a welder in 2021? In this video, we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of choosing welding as an occupation. We're going to get into the compensation of welders, and we're going to compare welding to similar occupations. We're also going to go over the jobs market. How competitive is it to try and become a welder? Are there jobs all across the country, or are there jobs in very specific areas of the country? But first, we're going to get into welding. What is welding, and what do welders do? Welding has got to be one of the manliest occupations out there. This is a great occupation for people that want to be on their feet, that want to build things and want to repair things. Welders work in a variety of industries from car racing to manufacturing. Arc welding is actually the most common type of welding today, which uses electric currents to create heat and bond metals together. There are more than 100 different processes that a welder can use to weld things together. The type of weld is usually determined by the types of metals being joined and the conditions under which the welding is to take place. People that work as welders also might work as cutters, which uses heat to cut and trim metal objects to specific dimensions. In addition to bonding different metals together, welders also study blueprints, sketches, and specifications. They also need to calculate the dimensions of parts that are being welded. One of the advantages of becoming a welder is the barrier to entry is fairly low. It's actually lower than a lot of the other trades. To become a welder, you typically just need a high school diploma. You don't need a college degree or an associate's degree. You typically first need to get a high school diploma. Usually the Occupation Information Network has some kind of breakdown where they show the percentage of people in a given occupation have a high school degree, high school plus certificate. They don't actually have this for welding, but a large proportion of welders typically have some high school degree plus some kind of certificate. Next, we'll get into the compensation of welders in the United States. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2020, the average base salary for a welder, and this is assuming 40-hour work weeks with no overtime, was $46,280. Many of the other trades have a slightly higher base salary than welders. For example, auto mechanics make a little bit more, just a couple $100 more per year. And plumbers, electricians, aircraft mechanics, solar panel installers, all typically make a higher wage than welders. Although welders are seeing faster wage growth than they have in years past. In the year 2000, the average base salary for a welder, assuming 40-hour work weeks, was $29,080. This rose to $46,280 in 2020. When you look at the whole 2 decades, the average wage growth was about $820 gained every single year in salary. But when you look at 2015 to 2020, the wage growth has increased to about $885 per year. So wage growth is increasing a little bit for welders. And even though welders have a lower base salary on average compared to some of the other trades, there's certain states that tend to pay welders a lot more than others. According to the government, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the final frontier state, the state of Alaska, had an average base salary, assuming 40 hours a week, for welders at $71,880. Hawaii, the Aloha state, also has a high base salary of $65,650 per year. Other high-paying places for welders include Washington, D.C., Wyoming, and North Dakota. And like I said previously, this is assuming 40 hours a week. A lot of welders work overtime and they're paid for that overtime. Oftentimes they'll get time and a half, but if they're working a certain amount of hours, they'll get actually double time, especially in a place like California and in certain other states. And it really just depends on the business contract at which point a welder would get double time. And this double time can really boost their income. The other big way welders can boost their income is to own their own company. According to the government, about 5% of welders are self-employed. This is on par with electricians. About 5% of electricians are also self-employed. But there are certain occupations, certain other trades that have a higher percentage of people that are self-employed, such as auto mechanics and wind turbine techs. But 1 out of 20 welders is self-employed. There definitely is something to that. So 2 ways to really boost your income: self-employment or lots and lots of overtime. Next, we're going to get into the job market. How competitive is it to try and become a welder in 2021? First thing you need to understand is this is a giant workforce. In 2020, there were 430,700 employed welders in the entire country. Now, this is less than the number of employed electricians and auto mechanics, but there's actually more welders employed than there are plumbers, and there's also more welders than there were elevator mechanics and HVAC techs. And when you look at the number of employed welders, they have seen pretty good job gains since 2012. In 2012, there's about 329,000 employed welders in the United States. This grew to 445,000 in 2019. And then with the pandemic occurring, the number of employed dropped a little bit by about 15,000 jobs. But this most likely will rebound right after the pandemic is over, whenever the pandemic is over. Now, the US government doesn't have a super great forecast for welders going into the future, going into the next 10 years. They're anticipating about a 3% growth in jobs for welders going into 2030. This is actually a lot more than, say, auto mechanics. They're actually anticipating a 4% decline in the number of auto mechanics over the next 10 years. But when you compare, say, welding to wind turbine techs and solar panel installers, those two occupations are two of the hottest trades right now. They're seeing crazy wage growth, although these are both very tiny occupations compared to welding. We're talking thousands of jobs, thousands of people in the workforce versus hundreds of thousands of welders, electricians, or plumbers. But if you were to compare this occupation to plumbing or trying to become an electrician, the government is forecasting less job growth for welders than plumbers and electricians. Another interesting thing about welding is that the jobs are actually very concentrated in a couple different states. It seems like Texas is the best state for welders in 2020. According to the US government, last year, Texas had 48,940 employed welders. So the Lone Star State, the state of Texas, is hands down one of the best states to be a welder. It's actually followed by the Golden State, the state of California, where there's about 30,000. But even comparing Texas to California, there's almost 20,000 more employed welders in Texas over California. Two other good states for welding, Pennsylvania and Ohio. They also have a lot of opportunities for welders. So it's great to look at government numbers, but to really get a real-time estimate on the demand for welders is actually to go to different job boards and see how many job opportunities there are for welders. I typically use 3 different job boards. I use Glassdoor.com, Indeed, and LinkedIn. And this really gives us a real-time estimate of the demand for welders right now. On Glassdoor.com, when I searched for welder job opportunities in the United States, came up with 9,129 job opportunities. Meanwhile, on Indeed.com, I got 8,155 job postings for welders in the United States. Finally, on LinkedIn, there were 18,120 job opportunities. So a great way to determine the demand for a particular occupation is to compare the number of job opportunities to the number of employed, say, the size of the workforce. And for welders, it does look pretty competitive. When I did this particular research for, say, electricians and plumbers, it looks a little bit better. When you compare the number of job opportunities to the number of employed, it's a little bit stronger than this. So welding right now looks actually fairly competitive. But like I said earlier, there are certain parts of the country where there's probably really great job opportunities for welding, such as the Lone Star State, the state of Texas, and California. Unfortunately, California is an extremely expensive place to live, but there are more job opportunities there. So those are some pros and cons of trying to become a welder in 2021. Really hope this helped you out with your particular career search. If you enjoyed this video, definitely also check out my electrician video and or my plumbing video. Another great occupation is trying to become an elevator mechanic, although that's probably even more competitive than welding right now. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.